Excellent. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am so excited to be here to talk to you all today about consciousness and leadership. I've got quite a lot on my agenda for you all today, and so I hope you will hang with me as we walk through the next maybe 40 or so minutes. And before we start, I want to just share one question with you. So, what is the legacy that you want to leave in the world? And what do you do every single day to support that legacy? And I want you to just take a moment to think about this and reflect on this. And as we move throughout the next little bit of time, I want you all to come back to this question. Now, the first time that I was ever forced to confront my own deeply held beliefs, what they mean for who I am and who I want to be in the world, I was about 12 years old. And I had my all time favorite aunt. She came and visited on one of the holidays, and I will never forget her leaving in a fit and swearing that she would never see us and my family again. And I didn't understand at the time what happened, why it happened, and why it was so important. But essentially, I grew up in a very ignorant and very racist environment. And I didn't know that some of those beliefs had kind of been ingrained in my being and who I was. So much so that I could not understand it when my aunt told my father that if he didn't stop using specific language and talking about other people in a way that was derogatory, that she didn't want to have anything to do with him. And I had to actually question, what is it about this word and this language that made my aunt so upset that I didn't see her again for several years? And I will be the first person to share that it did not come to me for several years following that. You know, thankfully, I was adopted by this aunt way later in my childhood. And I was able to kind of navigate and explore some of the areas that were so important to her and how she navigated the world. And, you know, of course, I didn't understand the impact that that was going to have on me then. And I didn't even understand what it would look like for me to try and look back on that moment, to look back on my socialization, to try and unlearn and relearn some of the things that I had learned as a kid. And so, you know, fast forward several years now, I am in graduate school. I'm in a relationship with a really great partner. And I was forced to really confront for the second time some of these beliefs and how I interacted with the world. Now, this particular time was another person that I cared very deeply for, and that shared with me that I was not living in alignment with the person that I wanted to be. I was having some concerns related to my irritability and the way that I treated other people when I became irritable, and I was forced to reflect on my own actions and behaviors. And I was told by my partner, who was the person who brought this to me, that it was impacting our dynamic and that they wanted to be there with me to support me through whatever it was that I needed. Now, I didn't know at the time that I had a traumatic brain injury and that this was causing me to have severe irritability. It was causing me to have memory problems. It was causing a speech impediment where I was stuttering. I was having a hard time remembering words and trying to figure out, you know, how do I navigate all of this? And also, how do I do it in a way that is in alignment with the person that I believe that I am? And so this second time actually forced me to confront my actions and my behaviors related to the person that I wanted to be. And at the time, I did not have the self awareness to be able to recognize that I was being irritable, that I was not treating people the way that I wanted to treat them, and that I had to make adjustments in my life. And based on exploring my experiences, exploring my interpersonal dynamics with my partner, I really had to bring intention to the way that I was being in the world. I had to reflect on, who am I? What are the values that I have? Who do I want to be in the world? And I had to then recognize and adapt my behaviors so that I could be the person that I wanted to be. Now, why am I sharing this with you? For me, these are very deeply ingrained beliefs and very personal beliefs that I have had to navigate. And I'm sharing these with you all today because we're here to talk about conscious leadership. And we're here to talk about how consciousness impacts our leadership. And what I want to do over the next little bit of time is I want to share what I believe is a simple and effective way to be able to practically apply some of these huge concepts that we throw around, like consciousness, reflexivity, and intentionality. I want to be able to teach you how to practically apply some of these things and how to navigate complexities with clarity and with ease, and preferably to do that in the moment. And we're going to talk about some areas like body intelligence and emotional intelligence, how our thoughts and our feelings are going to impact our dynamics, what it's going to mean for us, and how we respond to people, how we respond to ourselves. And we're going to talk about all different kinds of things. But the first thing that I want us to start with is to recognize that we have all been socialized in a world that has taught us that we have to be a certain way, we have to act a certain way, and we have to do that in a way that is in alignment with our cultural and our societal upbringing. And one of the things that I want you all to take away from today's discussion is that it is okay to look back on those societal beliefs, those values that we were taught to us as children, and that we continue to learn every day in the societies and the cultural context that we live in. And it is okay to say, you know what? That's actually not who I want to be in the world. And as part of this process, I want to talk about three key areas that I believe are critical to our own consciousness journey. Now, these three areas are going to kind of help us to understand how do we practically apply this information, and how do we do it in a way that is going to help us be better leaders. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the research in the consciousness leadership field. So many of you here know what conscious leadership is, you know what it's about, and you've probably heard some of the research. But for anyone who hasn't, I would love to share some thoughts from John Ranesh, who's the founder of conscious leadership. And that is, the first place that we have to look is within, on our own intolerance, our own resignation, our own unconsciousness, or our lack of compassion. And that this inner work is the foundation of everything that we have to contribute, and it impacts everyone else in the world. If we can become clear on this, then we will be able to work on things outside of ourselves. He also believes that conscious leaders have to act with intentional behaviors and interactions with others, and they have to be cognizant of the contextual factors and understand the interconnectedness of our complex global systems. Now, these areas are actually the foundation of what we're going to talk about today. When I talk about conscious leadership with leaders, I talk to them about needing to master personal mastery, social mastery, and societal or systemic mastery. Now, the only thing we're going to talk about today is that personal mastery. How do we master the behaviors and the skills that we need to be better leaders? And that's going to start with these three areas of reflexivity, intentionality, and congruence. Now, before we jump into each one of these areas, I want to share very, very briefly how this relates to conscious leadership. So, Daniel Goleman, who's an expert in emotional and social intelligence, likes to talk about personal mastery. And he also says that personal mastery can only get leaders so far. Leaders have to go the extra mile. They have to master the social and environmental components that influence their team, their organization, and the societal context, which therefore will extend to the global context. Rosen and Swan, two additional researchers, shared that nothing is more important than understanding ourselves, our relationships, and our surroundings. They go on to share that being conscious helps us to think deeper, learn faster, and collaborate better. And the more aware we are, the faster we can adapt and accelerate, and the higher performing we become. So, in essence, all of these researchers and all of these experts have shared that in order for us to be better leaders, we have to understand our own selves, how we interact with other people in the world, and how that impacts us on a societal level and on a global level. I shared a little bit about my personal story earlier, and I want to put it into a little bit of context for us, right? So, the only way that we can learn or understand that we are not being congruent in our lives is to be able to practice reflexivity and to consistently seek feedback from others that we can act on. And the only way to implement change in our lives is by bringing intention to these specific areas that have been identified. And so for me, when I look at this, I think about as I was unlearning and relearning some of the things that I learned as a child about racism and sexism and homophobia, I had to be able to recognize that these are the thoughts and the beliefs that I have to be true in the world. And I also had to say, is this who I want to be in the world? What are the values that I have? And for me, those values were kindness, authenticity, and equity. And because of the values that I held, I had to say, you know what? I have to let go of a lot of these beliefs that I have in the world. And the process of letting go of those, I will say, took me 10 to 15 years to be able to really let go of some of the things that I believed in, right? And when I think about my story of my traumatic brain injury and changing my specific behaviors and actions as it relates to my irritability and the way that I treated people when I became irritable, I had to be able to recognize in the moment, what is triggering me to become irritable? What am I saying and doing in the moment that is causing me to not act in alignments with what I believe to be true? And I had to reflect on that. I had to practice mindfulness and I had to practice breathing techniques to be able to help me navigate changing my behaviors so that I could be the person that I wanted to be. Now, when we talk about leadership and we approach leadership from the understanding that we have to be able to recognize all of these different areas, how they impact us in the workplace, and how we navigate our interpersonal dynamics with others, then we have to be able to understand what consciousness is, what reflexivity is, what congruence is, and what intentionality is, so that we can understand when we need to expand our own consciousness, so that we know what we have to do practically to be able to adjust some of our behaviors and our actions. and how we live in congruence every single day so that we model the behaviors and we teach our team members and our organizations that we're trustworthy and that we can live in integrity with our actions and our values. So, the first thing I want to do is I want to share my definition of what consciousness is. So, there are all different ways to look at consciousness, and I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed because when I think about consciousness, I think about it from a very simple definition of an awareness of ourselves and others and the interactions of each other in this larger context of our society and of our globe. Now, as in any system, there are always layers of complexity and understanding that are required to be fully operational. And when I talk about increasing consciousness, it's about recognizing that there is complexity that we need to understand to be able to navigate our environment. Now, when we talk about consciousness in leadership, we have to be able to practice reflexivity. And I'm going to talk about what this is in just a moment, but we have to be able to practice reflexivity by increasing our awareness of ourselves and others and how that impacts our team and our organizations. We have to be able to embody consciousness practices that facilitate the integration of these specific behaviors and habits and how those behaviors and habits are going to support our growth. We have to be able to build competency and confidence to be able to respond to contextual situations with adaptability and with ease, and by engaging with our community and practicing the skills that we're going to talk about. And then we finally have to be able to use these skills intentionally to influence systemic change. So let's start with reflexivity. When I talk about reflexivity, I am talking about the capacity to be able to reflect and to act on our own thoughts, actions, and experiences. Now, this involves a continuous loop of self awareness, self evaluation, and self adjustment. And self adjustment is the key to this entire process because knowledge is not helpful to us unless we know how to competently apply it, right? So, how do we take the insights that we have gained through our self reflection and through our interactions with others, and how do we create change in our lives based on the insights that we've gathered? Now, reflexivity is the foundation of personal leadership, and we cannot facilitate consciousness building in practice unless we can master this continuous cycle of self reflection, self evaluation, and self adjustment. And so, as an example, I shared about my own process of navigating, learning, and relearning some of the behaviors associated with my head injury. Irritability was a huge component of that. And so, as part of my self awareness, I was not aware enough to be able to recognize that I had this problem that existed in my life. Now, thankfully, I had other people in my life who were comfortable enough to share that with me. And so, that evaluative process of someone saying, this is an area that you need to improve on, triggered in me, okay, do I need to think about this? Do I need to understand what's happening? Do I need to make adjustments in my life? And of course, because I want to be a good partner, I wanted to be a good person, and I wanted to live in alignment with my values, I then had to make adjustments to how I was interacting with people. So this self-adjustment cycle is really, really important. So I had an area that had been identified as a concern. I recognized that I was not living in congruence with the person that I wanted to be because of that. And then I had to take action every single day when I became irritable. I had to pause and I had to reflect and I had to remind myself that when I become irritable, I tend to treat people in a way that's not in alignment with my values. And then I had to say, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to say that in that tone. I did not mean to hurt your feelings. I did not mean to do whatever it was that my irritability caused me to do. And I had to start to repair. Now, eventually, I was able to get to a place in my reflexivity cycle where I was practicing over and over again in the moment of recognizing these behaviors, recognizing the impact, and adjusting those behaviors and the impact to where today I am much more able to recognize the signs in my body and in my mind before it gets to that point. And now I am able to reflexively recognize, okay, my body's telling me that I'm irritable. My brain is telling me that I'm irritable. So I need to pause. I need to step back. I need to take some deep breaths. I need to, go for a run, or I need to do something else, whatever it is that you have, right? But for me, it most of the time was just I needed to pause and I needed to remind myself from my rational brain that there's no reason to be upset. There is no reason for me to get upset about whatever it was that I was getting irritable about, right? And this is a really, really hard process to do, especially when it involves things like, excuse me, especially when it involves things like diversity and inclusion topics, different cultures, different beliefs about the world and how we interact and how we engage with people in the world, politics, right? Whatever it is, these are really, really hard things to do. And so we have to have some sort of cycle in which we can learn about what we need to be better and then define what it is that we need to do, bring intention to that so that we can live in congruence and with the person that we want to be. And so with that, let's talk about intentionality and congruence. And so if we have a cycle of reflexivity where we are consistently getting information and feedback from the world about how we can improve and how we can grow, then what we have to do next is we have to bring intentionality to that process. And so for me, my intention was to not upset other people with my irritability. And so irritability, unfortunately for me, having a head injury is a part of my life, and I have to just navigate that as it comes up for me, right? And so I have to be able to bring intention to when my body or when my mind is telling me that I'm irritable, I have to intentionally calm my nervous system. I have to intentionally think about how I am interacting and engaging with others. And I have to bring purpose and clarity to the decisions and the choices that I make. And I have to do that in a way that is in alignment with my values and the impact that I'm having on other people. And to put this into a leadership context, the objectives and the goals that we have for our team or for our organization. Now, what this looks like is deliberately setting goals, deliberately making thoughtful decisions, and acting every day in alignment with our desired outcomes, rather than operating on autopilot, which so many of us tend to do, especially in the workplace when everything is crazy and we're trying to navigate all of our concerns, all of our schedules, and everything else that comes into our daily lives. We have to be able to pause and we have to act with purpose and clarity. And that is intentionality. And this is the guiding force that kind of helps leaders to be able to consider how their actions are affecting their teams, their stakeholders, and the organizational culture. And what intentionality does is it empowers leaders to be able to navigate complex situations with mindfulness, to align with their long-term vision and their goals, and to be able to foster environments of trust, equity, and engagement, right? None of which can be done unless we are being intentional about how we are acting and how we are behaving with our team members and our organizations. So, this brings us to congruence. When I talk about congruence with leaders, I talk about an alignment and authenticity between our values, our actions, and our behaviors, and how we use this to create a connection between our internal principles, thoughts, values, beliefs, and our external actions. And so, to put it in a simpler way, are we acting in alignment with our values? Are we behaving in a way with how we want to be in the world? Right? And what this is about is ensuring that as leaders, we are reflecting on how we lead, how we interact with others, and how we make decisions that are going to foster a culture of integrity and trust, right? So, my integrity is if I am not living in alignment with my values, then I am demonstrating to other people that I do not have integrity because I am saying that one thing is important and I am acting in a different way. And that incongruence in my behaviors shows people that I am not a trustworthy person. So, in order to have trust and to demonstrate integrity, we have to make sure that we're being aware of and we are living in congruence with the values and the goals that we have identified, both for ourselves and for the organization. And congruence is about ensuring that what we believe in as leaders is fully reflected in how we lead, how we interact, how we make those decisions, and how we communicate and navigate our interpersonal relationships. And so, with that, I want to just kind of close out a little bit of this conversation of the three areas, and then I want to dive specifically into reflexivity. And I want to do this because I almost always get asked by leaders, all of this is great information. I know that I'm supposed to do all of this, but how do I do it? What does it look like? How do I practice it? And what are the mechanisms and the processes that I have to have? And so we talked about consciousness, what it is. We talked about reflexivity, what it is. And we talked about congruence and intentionality and what those are. The next thing that I want to do is I want to dive into this reflexivity cycle. And I want to talk briefly about each one of these areas: self-awareness, self-evaluation, and self-adjustment. And I want to give you some specific tools on how you can practice these areas, what it looks like, and give you some kind of guiding questions to help you if you've never had to think about some of the things that we've talked about before. And so let's start with self-awareness. When we talk about self-awareness, there are so many different things that we have to be aware of as leaders. And so I want to give you a couple of areas that leaders specifically really need to hone in on to be able to be effective and to be conscious leaders, right? And so you want to think about things like, what are the values that you have? What are the specific beliefs that you have about the world? How did you learn those beliefs? How do those beliefs impact the decisions that you make every single day? What kind of identities do you have in your life that may influence who you hang out with, who you promote, who you decide is trustworthy, who you decide is ready for that next step? What are the personalities that you have in different contexts of your life? What are the personalities that you get along with in others? And what are the personalities that rub up against you and who you are? And how do you navigate those when you recognize that Maybe you have someone on your team who has one of those personalities. What are the specific knowledge base or competency areas that you need to develop as a leader? There are so many different things out there when it comes to body intelligence, emotional intelligence, social intelligence, systems intelligence, cultural intelligence. I could go on about all of the areas that have been identified as key areas that leaders need to develop. And so for you, what are those areas? What is your confidence like? And does that shift in different dynamics? Are you much more comfortable and confident talking to a team, or would you prefer to be on a stage talking to thousands of people, right? And how does that impact your message? And how does your level of competence in certain areas influence you as you're navigating your team dynamics, as you're navigating your organizational dynamics, or as you're navigating the systemic or societal areas that we have to focus in on as leaders? Right? So, those are some of the key areas that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about our own self awareness. Now, I also want you to be able to understand how you can develop some of these things. And so I'm going to list a couple of practices. These are not an exhaustive list, and you are welcome to add to this list, right? Self reflection is huge. Do you take time every day or every week to sit and reflect on some of these areas? Your values, your beliefs, your identities, the personalities, etc. Do you have a mindfulness practice or a meditative practice that helps to teach you what's happening in your mind, what's happening in your body, and how that is impacting you? Or what is happening in your interpersonal dynamics in the office? Do you have a journaling routine where you can write about how you're thinking, how you're feeling, what beliefs you're exploring right now, what areas of competence you're trying to develop, and how far you've come in that process? Do you solicit feedback from other people? Do you have a schedule learning routine? Like, how do you acquire knowledge? And do you have mechanisms in place to remind you that you need to continuously develop yourself in these areas, right? Do you talk to other people about any of these things that we've already shared? Do you have a coaching circle? Do you have a mentoring group? Like, any of these areas are all really, really great ways that you can develop your self awareness. And maybe one more thing I will add in this area is body scans, right? Body intelligence is so important. And so many leaders do not know how to say, I am having a physiological reaction to this conversation, to this person, to this event. And I don't know how to articulate that, how to navigate that, right? And so body scans can teach us to pause and to say, what's happening in my mind, what's happening in my body, and how is that interrupting who I am and how I'm being, right? And all of these are areas that we can develop to help bring greater self awareness to our leadership. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to talk about self evaluation. How do we do it? What does it look like? Now, when we talk about self evaluation, there are all different kinds of ways that leaders can do this. Probably the most readily available is something called 360-degree feedback. Now, whether you or not you choose to do this formally by using some of the technology that's out there to do this, or whether you choose to do it informally by asking everyone in your life to give you feedback, the purpose here is just to get feedback. What are we doing well? Where do we need to improve? How can you be a better friend? How can you be a better leader? How can you be a better person in the world? Right? And we cannot do that unless we know, what are we good at? What are our areas of weakness? And just like I didn't know that I was struggling with my TBI symptoms, many times leaders cannot see this for themselves. And so while self-evaluation through self-reflection and meditation and all of those things are important, we also have to take that extra step to ask other people in our lives. And we can do this again through mentors, through coaches, through accountability partners, through our friends, through our family, whoever it is that we have in our lives that we trust to have intimate conversations with. We want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to get feedback. And we can also do this through self-evaluative processes, like specifically if it's a skill-based, taking assessments on emotional intelligence, social intelligence, systems intelligence. All of these areas are studied in the research, and we can actually go online. We can take tests that tells us how good we are based on very specific skills, right? We can also take tests on things like implicit bias. We can take tests on all different kinds of areas to think about, where do we need to improve, right? So targeted reflection, taking assessments. If we want to journal, we can journal about this process and where it's at. And if you do choose to do some self-evaluated things, I would love to give you some ideas, some questions about, what are we talking about? What does this look like? So what are the specific skills that you lack, and how can you get them? What are the specific areas that you're good at, and how can you capitalize on those areas? How can you bring intention to these areas to capitalize on your skill sets and to improve areas that need improvement? Asking yourself, how much do I know or not know about a specific topic? And how can I get that information? Asking yourself, how do my daily actions align with my long-term objectives? How do they align with my values? And do I model those values every single day? How do I embody the specific traits that I value most? And answering that question alone can be incredible to your leadership style. Asking, what kind of challenges did you face today or this week? And how did you respond to those challenges? And if you did not respond in a way that is in alignment with the leader that you want to be, what areas can you address? Now, in this self-evaluation process, we want you to periodically look at your skill sets, your critical leadership skill sets. So communication, conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, social intelligence, all of these areas. And we want you to evaluate things like, how much time are you spending on personal and professional growth? What areas do you need to complement your skill sets? And how do you get information? Do you like to read? Do you like to listen to that information? Do you like to go to events like this and participate? Right? Do you have a coach that you work with? Do you have a mentor that you work with? And if you don't have any of those, what kinds of ways would you most appreciate and most be able to embody and implement? Because not all of these areas are going to help everyone, right? Some people love coaching, some people love mentoring. It doesn't matter which one you choose. What matters is it going to help you get from where you are to where you want to be? So the last thing we're going to talk about is the self-adjustment part of the cycle. And when we talk about self-adjustment, to me, this is the most important part of the process. It doesn't matter what information we've gotten on our self-awareness journey or on our self-evaluation journey if we do not put it into action, right? And so for me, with my head injury journey and my journey with my irritability, if I was like, oh, I get irritable and I treat people terrible, but that's just who I am. I have a head injury, so people are going to have to deal with it. Then, that doesn't do anything for me, and it doesn't do anything for the people in my life, right? So if you want to make change in the world, you have to be willing to make adjustments. You have to be able to make adjustments for yourself and for your team, so that as a leader, you can create the change and the legacy that you want. So let's talk about what is this, how do we do it, and what are some questions, right? So when we talk about self-adjustment, I want you to think about it in terms of what are the thoughts that I have in my mind that influence my feelings, my behaviors, and my actions. So thoughts first. What are the thoughts that come to me? What are the feelings that I have in my body that influence how I respond, right? And so for me, when I talk about my childhood and I talk about my life, my whole body starts to shake, my temperature rises, and I have a really hard time like settling myself back down to be able to coherently say what I want to say, right? And so I have to be able to recognize that my feelings are contributing to the physiological response in my body, which then causes me to react in a way that is not in alignment with who I am, right? So those thoughts, those feelings, and those physiological responses in our body are important. And we need to be able to recognize how that plays into how we create change in our lives. So we talked about thoughts, we talked about feelings, we talked about physiological reactions in our bodies. We also want to know what are the behaviors that I exhibit every single day. Do I say good morning to people? Do I ask people about how they are and how they're doing? Do I ask them how I can support them? Do I give them a smile? Do I treat them with respect? And all of these everyday behaviors are critical to the way that we are perceived by other people, right? Behaviors and actions. And so the actions that we take as leaders every single day are critical to how we respond and how other people perceive us in our congruence and in our integrity, right? So we have to be mindful of the specific behaviors and actions that we need to take to be able to adjust who we are and how we are. And finally, the last two things I'll share is decisions. What decisions have you made? How do those decisions impact your values, your presence and your being, and your leadership style? And if those decisions are not in alignment with your values, with the organizational goals, and those kinds of things, what do you need to do based on those previous decisions to repair your leadership or to continue acting in alignment if you're doing things that you want to model, right? And finally, prompts and mechanisms, right? Especially for me, I have a head injury, so I have to remind myself every single day. I have to have physical prompts that say don't forget this. Don't forget to check in with people. Don't forget to make sure that you engage with people in a way that is personable and meaningful to others. And so for me, especially with my head injury and with all of the things I have going on in my brain, sometimes I forget that just being a decent human being is important, right? And I don't mean a decent in terms of, being mean to anyone. I just mean that people want to engage with people who want to engage with them. And so how can I show people in my actions and behaviors that I want to engage with them, that I care about them, and that what is happening in the world matters to me and to other people, right? So sometimes I have to prompt myself with notes in my planner, with notes in my phone and other things. And so what kinds of prompts and what kinds of mechanisms do you need to support you in adjusting some of your behaviors? And another example of a prompt is having an accountability partner who, if you're working on changing a behavior or an action in your life, can prompt you when they see you doing it, especially if you don't have this self-awareness to be able to recognize that you're doing it, right? So accountability partners can also be prompts for us. Okay. Let's talk really quickly about how we can do this. I talked about an accountability partner. We also have mentors. We also have coaching circles. We can also do this through self-reflection, of keeping a log of the specific actions and behaviors that we exhibited, how we made adjustments in the moment. If we were not able to make adjustments in the moment, how could we have made adjustments in the moment? Or how can we go back and repair any harm that we may have done, and those kinds of things. And so reflections, weekly reflections, daily reflections, actually journaling about what was happening in your mind, what was happening in your body, what kinds of unconscious bias came up for you as you were talking to other people, and those kinds of things. And if you've never had to think about this before, I want to give you a couple of questions and then we'll close out. But when you're in your self-adjustment cycle, you want to ask yourself, if I am not living in alignment with my behaviors, actions, and decisions, what can I do to adjust? What specific behaviors, what specific actions can I take when I'm in that moment? Right? And sometimes reflecting on that is enough, and sometimes you actively have to practice it over and over and over again. Right? You want to also ask yourself, how do I hold myself accountable to these adjustments? So you've identified an area that needs to be adjusted. How do you hold yourself accountable to that in the moment and afterwards? How can you prompt yourself to create a pause and a reflection in the moment? Especially as leaders, in the moment is one of the most critical tasks that you can master, because a lot of times our influence and our credibility can be ruined in moments. So we have to be able to recognize if we are in a moment that is impacting our integrity, it's impacting our congruence, or it's impacting our interpersonal dynamic. How do we pause? How do we navigate what's happening for us in our mind and in our body? And then how do we breathe through that to be able to adjust our actions and our behaviors in the moment with the person that we're sitting with, right? And finally, what kinds of mechanisms can we create to remind ourselves of our values and the commitments that we've made to ourselves? And all of this comes back to the question that I asked you in the beginning. What is the legacy that you have or that you want to leave? And what actions and behaviors do you take every single day to model that? And we've talked in this discussion today about consciousness. We've talked about the cycle of reflexivity, which is self-awareness, self-evaluation, and self-adjustment. And we also talked about how intentionality and congruence impact that cycle, right? Once we know where we're incongruent, we have to bring intention to that in order to adjust and to be more reflexive in the moment. So as I start to close out here, I want to touch on a little bit of recommendations from the research. And I want to start with a group of really wonderful researchers who say that leaders have to be able to utilize an integrative model where their behaviors mediate the relationship between their traits and their effectiveness. And so, what does this mean? It means that as leaders, we have to be able to understand that our effectiveness depends on our own ability to tailor our behaviors to the demands of the situation. And all of this is exactly what we have been talking about. If we want to be effective leaders, we have to be able to tailor our own responses to match the dynamics of the situation that we're in. Now, if you can master these areas as a leader, reflexivity, intentionality, and congruence, then this is going to help you set the stage for whatever the legacy is that you want to leave, and hopefully can inspire exponential change in your life, in your team's life, in your community's life, and in your society's environment, right? So, as I close out, I want to ask you to consider three things. How can you integrate or embody reflexivity as a daily practice? How can you integrate mechanisms into your daily routines to ensure that you're being congruent with your behaviors, actions, and decisions? And finally, how can you bring intentionality to the specific areas that you want to focus on to be a conscious leader? Thank you all so much for your participation. My name again is Aang, and I am the founder of Increasing Consciousness, which is a company that I created to facilitate equity in the world through elevating the consciousness of world leaders. And we have three goals as part of our company. The first is to increase leaders' awareness of themselves and others as interconnected beings, to teach leaders to embody consciousness practices that facilitate the integration of these behaviors and habits to support their growth. And third, to empower leaders to use these skills to intentionally influence systemic change. I'm so excited to join you for the Conscious Leadership Summit. I will be here and I will be available to answer any questions that you have. And if you do not want to ask in this format, I would love to hear from you still. Feel free to connect with me on whatever platform or channel you like. I am on email. My email is aang@increasingconsciousness.org. I am on Instagram at increasing_consciousness. And my website is increasingconsciousness.org. I have a YouTube channel, which you can reach me at Coach Aang, or you can follow me on LinkedIn with Aang Lakey. Thank you all so much. So happy to be here, and I look forward to your questions and the discussions.